The sun was setting over the busy international airport. People moved quickly through the terminals, dragging suitcases, checking their watches, and talking loudly into phones. It was a typical evening at one of the world's busiest travel hubs. Among the crowd stood Marcus Thompson, a tall man with dark skin and a calm expression. He wore jeans, a plain blue shirt, and sneakers. To anyone passing by, he looked like just another traveler trying to get home after a long day. But Marcus wasn't an ordinary traveler. He was a highly skilled pilot who had flown planes for more than 20 years. Today, though, he wasn't working. After attending a conference earlier that afternoon, he was heading back to his hometown as a passenger. His flight was scheduled to leave in an hour, so he stood near gate 27, waiting patiently to board. As Marcus waited, he noticed the flight attendants nearby. They were dressed neatly in uniforms, blue skirts or trousers with matching jackets. One of them caught his eye because she seemed to be whispering to her coworker while glancing at him. Her name tag read Carla. She was young, probably in her late 20s, with blonde hair tied back in a tight bun. Marcus didn't think much of it at first. Airports were full of people watching others, often without meaning any harm. But then Carla leaned closer to her colleague Greg and said something that made both of them laugh softly. Marcus couldn't hear exactly what they were saying, but he could tell it wasn't friendly. Their body language gave it away. They pointed subtly toward him, smirked, and exchanged knowing looks. Greg nodded and whispered back, "Yeah, guys like him always cause trouble." Marcus felt a familiar pang in his chest. He'd heard comments like this before. Over the years, he faced plenty of unfair treatment because of how he looked. Whether it was security guards questioning him at checkpoints or strangers assuming he didn't belong somewhere important, these moments stayed with him. Still, he chose not to react. Instead, he kept his gaze steady and continued waiting quietly. A few minutes later, boarding began. Passengers formed a line, shuffling forward with tickets in hand. Marcus joined the queue, keeping his head down. As he approached the gate, Carla scanned his ticket with a polite smile. "Enjoy your flight," she said cheerfully, though her tone lacked warmth. Once on board, Marcus found his seat, a middle one near the back of the plane. He settled in, placing his backpack under the chair in front of him. Around him, other passengers chatted noisily or scrolled through their phones. A child cried somewhere nearby, and the hum of engines filled the air as the plane prepared for takeoff. Meanwhile, Carla and Greg worked together to prepare the cabin. They checked seat belts, handed out snacks, and answered questions from nervous travelers. Despite her professional demeanor, Carla couldn't shake off her earlier thoughts about Marcus. Something about him bothered her, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. Maybe it was his quiet confidence or the way he carried himself. Whatever it was, it made her uneasy. "Did you see that guy?" Greg asked during a break. He lowered his voice so only Carla could hear. "The one sitting near the back." Carla nodded. "Yeah, I noticed him too. He looked suspicious." Greg chuckled. "Exactly. You know, those types always act like they own the place." Carla frowned slightly. Deep down, she knew they were being unfair. After all, Marcus hadn't done anything wrong. He'd been polite and cooperative throughout the boarding process. But old habits die hard, and stereotypes were hard to ignore. So instead of challenging Greg's words, she simply agreed. "Yeah, you're right. We should keep an eye on him." Back in his seat, Marcus tried to relax. He pulled out a book and flipped through its pages, pretending not to notice the stares coming his way. Occasionally, he glanced up and caught Carla looking at him. Each time she quickly turned away, embarrassed to be caught staring. Despite everything, Marcus refused to let negativity ruin his mood. He reminded himself that ignorance wasn't personal, it was systemic. People like Carla and Greg weren't born hateful, they learned prejudice from society. Still, it stung to be judged so harshly without even opening his mouth. As the plane taxied down the runway, Marcus closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Flying had always been his passion. Even as a child, he dreamed of soaring above the clouds, free from the limitations of the ground below. Now, decades later, he had achieved that dream. He flew thousands of people safely to their destinations every year, yet here he was, reduced to a stereotype by two strangers. The engines roared as the plane lifted off the ground. Outside the window, the city lights grew smaller and smaller until they disappeared altogether. Inside the cabin, the mood shifted. Passengers relaxed into their seats, chatting casually or closing their eyes for a nap. For now, all seemed well. But little did anyone know the real drama was yet to unfold. Unbeknownst to Carla, Greg, and the rest of the crew, the man they had dismissed so carelessly would soon prove to be the most important person on the entire flight. And when the moment came, Marcus wouldn't hesitate to step up, not because he wanted recognition, but because saving lives was what he did best. For now, however, Marcus remained silent. He watched the sky turn darker as the plane climbed higher. Somewhere far below, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the clouds in hues of orange and pink. It was a beautiful sight, one that reminded Marcus of why he loved flying in the first place. And so the stage was set. What started as an ordinary journey was about to become extraordinary. All it took was one mechanical failure, one unexpected twist of fate, and one man willing to rise above prejudice to save the day. The plane soared smoothly through the sky, cutting through fluffy white clouds as it climbed higher. Passengers settled into their seats, some chatting quietly, others closing their eyes for a nap. Marcus leaned back in his seat, gazing out the window at the endless expanse of blue above and below. For a moment, he felt peaceful, almost forgetting the earlier unpleasantness with Carla and Greg. But peace didn't last long. About 20 minutes into the flight, a strange noise filled the cabin, a loud, grinding sound that made everyone freeze. It was followed by a sudden jolt, like the plane had hit something hard. Drinks spilled, luggage rattled in the overhead bins, and screams erupted from passengers. The calm atmosphere turned chaotic in an instant. "What's happening?" Someone shouted near the front of the plane. "Is everything okay?" Another voice cried from behind. Marcus sat up straight, his heart pounding. He'd flown enough times to recognize trouble when he saw it. Something was wrong, very wrong. The engines roared louder than usual, struggling to keep the plane steady. Then came another violent shake, sending people gripping their armrests in fear. In the cockpit, things were even worse. The captain, a seasoned pilot named David, was fighting to regain control of the aircraft. Warning lights flashed across the dashboard, and alarms blared nonstop. "We've got a critical issue here," David yelled to his co-pilot, Sarah. "The left engine is failing." Sarah worked quickly, flipping switches and checking readings. "I'm trying, but we're losing altitude fast," she replied, her voice trembling. "We need help." Just then, disaster struck again. Without warning, Captain David collapsed onto the controls, clutching his chest. His face turned pale, and his breathing became shallow. Heart attack. Panic surged through Sarah as she realized she was now alone in the cockpit, responsible for over 200 lives. Back in the cabin, the situation grew worse. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling with a loud hiss, dangling just inches from terrified faces. Parents hurried to secure masks on their children while flight attendants scrambled to keep order. "Stay calm, everyone," Carla shouted, moving down the aisle with forced confidence. Inside, though, she was terrified. She'd never experienced anything like this before. Her mind raced with questions. Would they survive? Was there a way to fix the problem? And where was the captain? Greg, standing nearby, looked equally shaken. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice cracking under pressure. "I don't know," Carla snapped. "Just tell people to stay seated and breathe." Amid the chaos, Marcus remained calm. Years of experience as a pilot kicked in, overriding his fear. He knew what needed to be done, and he couldn't sit idly by while innocent lives were at risk. Standing up, he moved toward the front of the plane, pushing past startled passengers. "Excuse me," he said firmly, addressing Carla. "I'm a pilot. Let me help." Carla blinked, unsure if she heard him correctly. "A pilot?" she repeated, her voice hesitant. "Yes," Marcus replied. "My name is Marcus Thompson. I've been flying planes for over 20 years. You need to let me into the cockpit." For a split second, Carla hesitated. This was the same man she and Greg had mocked earlier, the one they dismissed as suspicious and unimportant. Could she really trust him now? But looking around at the frightened faces of passengers, she realized she had no choice. Every second mattered. "Okay," she finally said, stepping aside. "Follow me." As Marcus walked toward the cockpit, whispers spread among the passengers. "Who is that guy?" someone asked. "He says he's a pilot," another answered. "He looks like he knows what he's doing," a third person added, hope creeping into their tone. Reaching the cockpit door, Carla knocked loudly. When Sarah opened it, her eyes widened in relief. "Thank God," she exclaimed. "Are you really a pilot?" Marcus nodded, showing her his ID badge. "Yes, now show me what we're dealing with." Stepping inside, Marcus assessed the situation quickly. The left engine was completely out, and the right one was straining to keep the plane airborne. Alarms continued to blare, and the altimeter showed they were dropping dangerously low. They needed to act fast, or risk crashing. "Listen carefully," Marcus instructed, taking charge. First, contact air traffic control. Tell them we have an emergency and request permission to land immediately. Second, reduce speed slightly to conserve fuel. Third, prepare for a rough descent. Sarah nodded, following his orders without hesitation. Meanwhile, Marcus focused on stabilizing the plane. Using his expertise, he adjusted the controls, guiding the aircraft into a safer position. Slowly but surely, the shaking lessened, and the plane began to level off. Outside the cockpit, Carla watched anxiously. She couldn't believe how different Marcus seemed now compared to earlier. Back then, she judged him unfairly based on appearances. Now he was saving everyone's lives, including hers. Guilt washed over her as she replayed their earlier conversation in her head. How could she have been so wrong about him? Back in the cabin, passengers started to notice a change. The violent shaking had subsided, replaced by a gentler rocking motion. Though still scared, they began to feel a glimmer of hope. Some whispered prayers of thanks, while others clutched their loved ones tightly. "Is it over?" a woman asked nervously. "No," Marcus called out from the cockpit doorway, his voice firm but reassuring. "We're not safe yet, but we're working on it. Stay calm and follow instructions." His words calmed the crowd, giving them strength to endure whatever came next. Even Carla found herself inspired by his leadership. For the first time since the crisis began, she felt a sense of purpose. If Marcus could step up despite being insulted, then she could too. Returning to her duties, Carla moved through the aisles, helping passengers stay calm. She handed out water bottles, checked seatbelts, and offered comforting smiles. Each small action reminded her why she'd chosen this job in the first place, to care for people during difficult times. Meanwhile, Marcus stayed focused on the task ahead. Landing a damaged plane wasn't easy, especially with bad weather approaching. Dark clouds loomed in the distance, signaling turbulence ahead. But Marcus refused to give up. He'd faced challenges before, and he wouldn't let this one defeat him, not when so many lives depended on him. "All right," he told Sarah, adjusting the controls once more. "We're going to aim for that airstrip 20 miles south. It's our best shot." Sarah nodded, her hands trembling as she relayed the plan to air traffic control. "Emergency landing requested," she radioed. "We'll need medical teams and fire trucks standing by." "Roger that," the controller responded. "You're clear to land. Good luck." With each passing minute, the tension grew thicker. The plane descended slowly, buffeted by strong winds. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the darkening sky. Rain pelted the windows, making visibility poor. Yet Marcus remained steady, his years of training guiding him through the storm. "We can do this," he muttered under his breath, gripping the controls tightly. Just a little further. Behind him, Sarah watched in awe. She'd only met Marcus moments ago, but already she trusted him completely. His calm demeanor and quick thinking gave her courage when she needed it most. Finally, the airstrip came into view, a narrow strip of concrete surrounded by fields. Marcus guided the plane toward it, lowering the landing gear carefully. The wheels touched down with a thud, skidding slightly before coming to a stop. Cheers erupted from the cabin as passengers hugged each other, tears streaming down their faces. "We made it," Marcus said softly, exhaling deeply. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to feel relief. But he knew the real work was just beginning. Outside, emergency vehicles rushed to the scene, sirens wailing. Paramedics boarded the plane to tend to the injured captain and any other passengers who needed help. Reporters gathered nearby, eager to learn what had happened. As Marcus stepped out of the cockpit, applause greeted him. Passengers cheered, calling him a hero. Carla stood nearby, tears in her eyes. She approached him hesitantly, unsure of what to say. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I'm so sorry for how I treated you earlier. I was wrong." Marcus looked at her, his expression softening. "It's okay," he said gently. "What matters now is learning from this. Let's make sure no one else has to go through what I did today." Carla nodded, vowing silently to change, not just for herself, but for everyone. And with that, the nightmare ended, but the journey toward understanding and redemption had only just begun. The plane sat motionless on the airstrip, its engines silent, but its passengers buzzing with emotion. Cheers filled the cabin as people hugged each other, cried tears of relief, or simply clutched their loved ones tightly. For many, it felt like they'd been given a second chance at life, and they owed it all to one man, Marcus Thompson. As emergency responders rushed onto the scene, Marcus stepped out of the cockpit, his face calm despite the chaos around him. Passengers immediately surrounded him, thanking him over and over again. Some shook his hand, others patted him on the back, and a few even bowed slightly in gratitude. It was clear that Marcus had become a hero in their eyes. But for Carla, the moment was bittersweet. She stood near the front of the plane, watching Marcus interact with the crowd. Her heart ached with guilt as she replayed everything that had happened earlier. The rude comments, the dismissive glances, the way she judged him without knowing who he truly was. Now here he was, saving everyone's lives, including hers. Carla took a deep breath and approached him hesitantly. "Mr. Thompson," she began, her voice trembling. Can I talk to you for a moment?" Marcus turned to face her, his expression unreadable. For a brief second, Carla wondered if he would ignore her, or worse, reject her apology outright. But instead, he nodded and stepped aside, away from the crowd. "I just want to say," Carla started, struggling to find the right words. "I'm so sorry. What I said about you earlier, it was wrong. I didn't know who you were, and I let my assumptions get the better of me." Marcus listened quietly, his dark eyes fixed on her. When she finished speaking, he sighed softly. "It's not easy to admit when you're wrong," he said finally. "So thank you for saying that. But this isn't just about me. It's about how people like me are treated every single day." Carla nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I understand now," she whispered. "And I promise to do better. I don't ever want to make someone feel the way I made you feel today." Marcus gave her a small, sad smile. "That's a good start," he replied. "But remember, it's not enough to just apologize. You have to take action. Educate yourself. Challenge your biases. Stand up when you see injustice." Carla swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words sink in. She knew this wasn't going to be easy. Changing years of ingrained habits and beliefs would take time and effort. But for the first time in her life, she felt determined to try. Meanwhile, reporters gathered outside the plane, eager to capture the story. News crews set up cameras and microphones, shouting questions at anyone willing to speak. Word spread quickly about the heroic pilot who had saved the flight, and the flight attendants who had insulted him beforehand. When Marcus agreed to give a short interview, the crowd grew even larger. Standing in front of the cameras, he spoke calmly and clearly. "I did my job today because it was the right thing to do," he said. "Being a pilot means putting safety first, not just for passengers, but for everyone on board. That's what I trained for, and that's what I'll always do." Reporters pressed him for more details, asking how it felt to save so many lives after being treated unfairly. But Marcus refused to dwell on negativity. "This isn't about me," he emphasized. "It's about making sure no one else has to face discrimination in situations like this. We need to work together to create a world where everyone is treated with respect, no matter what they look like or where they come from." His words resonated deeply with those listening. Even Carla, standing nearby, felt inspired by his message. She realized that Marcus wasn't seeking revenge or pity. He wanted change, and she wanted to be part of that change. Back inside the plane, passengers reflected on what had happened. Many admitted they hadn't noticed the tension between Marcus and the crew earlier. They'd been too focused on their own concerns. But now, hearing the full story, they understood why it mattered so much. One elderly woman approached Carla, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Don't be too hard on yourself, dear," she said kindly. "We all make mistakes. What matters is learning from them." Carla managed a weak smile. "Thank you," she murmured. "I really needed to hear that." As the hours passed, the mood shifted from celebration to reflection. Emergency teams helped injured passengers off the plane, including Captain David, who was rushed to the hospital for treatment. Investigators arrived to examine the damaged aircraft, piecing together what had caused the engine failure. Meanwhile, the rest of the passengers were taken to a nearby terminal where food and blankets awaited them. In the terminal, conversations continued. People shared stories of fear, hope, and gratitude. Some praised Marcus openly, calling him a true hero. Others acknowledged the bravery of the entire crew, including Carla and Greg, who had worked tirelessly to keep everyone calm during the crisis. Greg, in particular, seemed shaken by the experience. He avoided eye contact with Marcus, but eventually mustered the courage to approach him. "I owe you an apology too," Greg admitted, his voice low. "What I said earlier, it was wrong. I shouldn't have judged you like that." Marcus nodded, accepting his apology with grace. "We all have room to grow," he said simply. "The important thing is that we learn from our mistakes." Greg looked relieved, though still visibly embarrassed. Like Carla, he vowed to change, to pay closer attention to his actions, and challenge harmful stereotypes whenever he encountered them. By evening, the initial shock had begun to wear off. Passengers slowly dispersed, heading home or booking new flights. Reporters packed up their equipment, leaving behind only echoes of questions and flashing lights. Yet the impact of the day lingered in everyone's minds. For Carla, the turning point came when she decided to take responsibility for her role in the events. Instead of hiding her mistake, she chose to share it publicly. During a press conference held later that week, she stood alongside Marcus, addressing the media with honesty and humility. I made a terrible error in judgment, Carla confessed, her voice steady despite her nerves. I judged someone based on appearances, and I was completely wrong. Mr. Thompson saved our lives that day, not just because he's an incredible pilot, but because he showed us the importance of treating everyone with dignity and respect. Her words received mixed reactions. Some criticized her for speaking out, accusing her of seeking attention. Others praised her for owning up to her mistake and using her platform to advocate for change. Regardless of the backlash, Carla remained committed to her decision. She enrolled in diversity training programs, attended workshops on implicit bias, and began mentoring young employees within her company. As for Marcus, he returned to his regular duties as a pilot. But his journey didn't end there. Inspired by the response to his actions, he became a vocal advocate for underrepresented groups in aviation. He gave speeches at schools and conferences, encouraging young people from diverse backgrounds to pursue careers in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM. He also worked with airlines to develop training programs aimed at reducing prejudice and promoting inclusivity. Over time, Marcus and Carla developed an unlikely friendship. They stayed in touch, exchanging emails and meeting occasionally to discuss progress in their respective efforts. Though they came from different worlds, they shared a common goal: creating a fairer, kinder industry. Looking back, both Marcus and Carla recognized that the incident had changed them forever. For Marcus, it reinforced his belief in resilience and leadership. For Carla, it marked the beginning of a journey towards self-awareness and growth. Together, they proved that even in the darkest moments, there is always an opportunity for redemption and for hope. When Marcus stepped out, the applause was deafening. People clapped, cheered, and chanted his name. Reporters who had gathered outside captured the scene, snapping photos and recording videos. It was clear that Marcus had become a hero, one who had risen above prejudice and proven his worth in the face of danger. Carla watched from a distance, overwhelmed with emotion. She wanted to join the celebration, but she also felt unworthy. How could she stand beside Marcus after everything she'd done? Still, she forced herself to move forward, knowing she needed to say something, to show her gratitude and commitment to change. Mr. Thompson, she said softly, approaching him hesitantly. Thank you for everything. Marcus turned to face her, his expression softening. You already thanked me once, he replied gently. What matters now is what you do next. Carla nodded, swallowing back tears. I promise to do better, to fight against bias, not just in my job, but in my life. Marcus smiled faintly. That's all anyone can ask for. His words gave Carla hope. She realized that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning from it and striving to improve. From that moment on, she vowed to be a better person, both personally and professionally. Emergency responders boarded the plane, tending to injured passengers and escorting everyone to safety. Captain David, who had suffered a heart attack, was rushed to the hospital for treatment. Though weak, he gave Marcus a grateful nod as paramedics wheeled him away. You saved us, he whispered hoarsely. Thank you. Investigations began immediately, with experts examining the damaged aircraft and piecing together what had caused the engine failure. Early reports suggested a manufacturing defect, but officials promised a thorough review to ensure such incidents never happened again. Meanwhile, news of Marcus's heroism spread rapidly. Social media lit up with praise, and headlines hailed him as a real-life superhero. Stories emerged about the flight attendants' earlier insults, sparking debates about prejudice and discrimination in the aviation industry. Some criticized Carla and Greg for their behavior, while others commended them for apologizing and seeking to grow. During a press conference held days later, Carla spoke openly about her mistake. Standing alongside Marcus, she admitted her wrongdoing and pledged to advocate for inclusivity within her company. Her honesty earned mixed reactions, but she remained steadfast in her resolve to create positive change. Greg, too, joined the effort. Inspired by Marcus's leadership, he became a vocal supporter of diversity initiatives. He attended workshops, participated in training programs, and encouraged his colleagues to challenge their biases. Slowly but surely, attitudes began to shift, not just among the crew, but throughout the airline. For Marcus, the aftermath of the flight reinforced his belief in resilience and unity. He continued flying, inspiring countless others with his professionalism and compassion. Off duty, he devoted himself to mentoring young pilots from underrepresented communities, sharing his knowledge and experiences to help them succeed. As weeks turned into months, the bond between Marcus and Carla grew stronger. Though they came from different worlds, they found common ground in their shared mission to promote fairness and understanding. Their friendship served as a reminder that growth often begins with discomfort, and that even the most unlikely alliances can lead to meaningful change. Looking back, Marcus reflected on the events that had unfolded. He knew that saving the flight hadn't been about proving himself or silencing critics. It had been about doing what was right, no matter the circumstances. And in doing so, he had sparked a ripple effect that extended far beyond the plane itself. The climax of the story wasn't just about landing safely. It was about rising above adversity, challenging stereotypes, and finding hope in the darkest moments. For Marcus, Carla, and everyone involved, the journey had transformed them in ways they never expected and set the stage for a brighter future. The storm outside had grown worse. Dark clouds pressed against the horizon, heavy with rain and lightning. Gusts of wind battered the plane as Marcus worked tirelessly in the cockpit, guiding the damaged aircraft toward the airstrip. Every second felt like an eternity, but Marcus refused to give up. He knew that failure wasn't an option, not when so many lives depended on him. Inside the cabin, passengers held their breath, clinging to each other or gripping their armrests tightly. The turbulence was relentless, tossing the plane from side to side. Children cried, adults whispered prayers, and flight attendants did their best to keep everyone calm. Carla moved through the aisles, her earlier guilt replaced by determination. She reminded herself of Marcus's words. What matters now is taking action. Stay seated, she called out firmly, helping a frightened elderly woman secure her seatbelt. We're almost there. Her voice carried reassurance, even though her heart raced with fear. She glanced toward the cockpit door, wishing she could see Marcus again. In just a few hours, he had gone from being someone she dismissed to someone she deeply admired and trusted. Back in the cockpit, Marcus focused intently on the controls. Sweat dripped down his forehead as he adjusted the plane's speed and altitude. The right engine groaned under the strain, struggling to keep them airborne. Lightning flashed nearby, illuminating the dark sky for brief moments. Each flash revealed how close they were to disaster, and how far they still had to go. We need to stabilize, Marcus said to Sarah, the co-pilot, who sat beside him. If we don't level off soon, we won't make it. Sarah nodded, her hands shaking slightly as she followed his instructions. Together, they worked as a team, communicating clearly and quickly. Marcus's years of experience shone through as he anticipated every problem before it happened. His calm demeanor gave Sarah strength, helping her push past her own panic. Outside, the airstrip loomed ahead, a narrow strip of concrete surrounded by open fields. It was their only chance at survival. Emergency vehicles waited nearby, their lights flashing red and blue in the distance. Paramedics, firefighters, and police officers stood ready, prepared for whatever might happen next. But landing wouldn't be easy. The weather made visibility nearly impossible, and the damaged plane responded sluggishly to commands. Marcus tightened his grip on the controls, focusing all his energy on keeping the aircraft steady. Lower the landing gear, he instructed Sarah. Slowly, don't rush it. She obeyed, her movements careful but deliberate. The wheels descended with a loud clunk, signaling that they were ready to touch down. Marcus took a deep breath, steadying himself for the final approach. Here we go, he muttered under his breath. Hold on tight. As the plane descended, the winds grew stronger, pushing them sideways. Rain pounded against the windows, making it hard to see. Marcus leaned forward, squinting through the chaos as he aimed for the center of the airstrip. This is it, he said aloud, more to himself than to Sarah. Trust me. The plane hit the ground with a jarring thud, skidding slightly before slowing down. Sparks flew from the wheels as they scraped against the wet concrete, but Marcus didn't let go of the controls. He applied steady pressure, ensuring the plane stayed on course despite the slippery surface. For a moment, it seemed like they might overshoot the runway. Passengers screamed, bracing themselves for impact. But Marcus's expertise paid off. He managed to bring the plane to a complete stop just inches away from the edge of the airstrip. Cheers erupted from the cabin as reality sank in. They had made it. Against all odds, they had survived. Passengers jumped to their feet, hugging each other and shouting in relief. Some knelt in prayer, tears streaming down their faces. Others rushed toward the cockpit, eager to thank the man who had saved them. When Marcus stepped out, the applause was deafening. People clapped, cheered, and chanted his name. Reporters who had gathered outside captured the scene, snapping photos and recording videos. It was clear that Marcus had become a hero, one who had risen above prejudice and proven his worth in the face of danger. Carla watched from a distance, overwhelmed with emotion. She wanted to join the celebration, but she also felt unworthy. How could she stand beside Marcus after everything she'd done? Still, she forced herself to move forward, knowing she needed to say something, to show her gratitude and commitment to change. "Mr. Thompson," she said softly, approaching him hesitantly. "Thank you for everything." Marcus turned to face her, his expression softening. "You already thanked me once," he replied gently. "What matters now is what you do next." Carla nodded, swallowing back tears. "I promise to do better, to fight against bias, not just in my job, but in my life." Marcus smiled faintly. "That's all anyone can ask for." His words gave Carla hope. She realized that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning from it and striving to improve. From that moment on, she vowed to be a better person, both personally and professionally. Emergency responders boarded the plane, tending to injured passengers and escorting everyone to safety. Captain David, who had suffered a heart attack, was rushed to the hospital for treatment. Though weak, he gave Marcus a grateful nod as paramedics wheeled him away. "You saved us," he whispered hoarsely. "Thank you." Investigations began immediately, with experts examining the damaged aircraft and piecing together what had caused the engine failure. Early reports suggested a manufacturing defect, but officials promised a thorough review to ensure such incidents never happened again. Weeks passed since that fateful flight, but its impact lingered long after the plane had landed safely. The incident became a turning point, not just for Marcus and Carla, but for everyone involved. Lives had been changed forever, and lessons learned would shape their futures in ways none of them could have predicted. For Marcus Thompson, life returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could get after being called a hero by millions. He resumed his duties as a pilot, flying passengers across continents with the same calm professionalism he'd always shown. Yet now there was something different about him. People noticed it in the way he carried himself, with quiet confidence and an unwavering sense of purpose. His actions during the emergency had proven what many already knew. Marcus wasn't just a skilled aviator. He was a leader who inspired others. The media attention eventually died down, but the legacy of that day lived on. Marcus received numerous awards and invitations to speak at events around the world. Instead of basking in the spotlight, he used these opportunities to advocate for underrepresented groups in aviation. At schools, colleges, and industry conferences, he shared his story, not to boast about his heroism, but to highlight the importance of diversity and inclusion. "Representation matters," Marcus often said during his speeches. "When young people see someone like themselves succeeding in fields where they're underrepresented, it gives them hope. It tells them they belong." He also pushed airlines to adopt stricter policies against discrimination, urging companies to provide training programs that addressed unconscious bias. His efforts didn't go unnoticed. Slowly but surely, changes began to take root within the aviation industry. More women, minorities, and individuals from diverse backgrounds started pursuing careers in aviation, encouraged by Marcus's example. Meanwhile, Carla embarked on her own journey of growth. After apologizing publicly and admitting her mistake, she faced criticism from some corners of society. Skeptics accused her of seeking forgiveness too easily or using the incident for personal gain. But Carla didn't let negativity deter her. She understood that true change required action, and she was ready to put in the work. Carla enrolled in workshops and seminars focused on diversity and equality. She read books, listened to podcasts, and attended lectures about systemic racism and implicit bias. Each lesson opened her eyes to new perspectives, challenging the assumptions she'd held for years. For the first time, she realized how deeply ingrained prejudice could be, and how much effort it took to unlearn harmful habits. At work, Carla became a vocal advocate for inclusivity. She suggested implementing sensitivity training programs for all employees and worked closely with HR to create safe spaces where colleagues could discuss issues of bias and discrimination. Her initiative earned respect from coworkers, including Greg, who joined her in championing change. Greg, too, transformed in unexpected ways. Once defensive about his earlier behavior, he now embraced accountability. He admitted his mistakes openly, both to friends and strangers, vowing to do better moving forward. Like Carla, he sought out educational resources and actively participated in discussions about fairness and equity. Over time, his efforts paid off. He became known not as someone who had made a poor judgment call, but as someone committed to making amends. The bond between Marcus, Carla, and Greg grew stronger as they collaborated to promote positive change. What had started as an unlikely alliance blossomed into genuine friendship. They met regularly, exchanging ideas and supporting one another through challenges. Together, they formed a committee dedicated to fostering inclusivity within their airline, a project that gained widespread support from executives and employees alike. Passengers from the flight remained connected as well. Many formed a Facebook group to stay in touch, sharing updates about their lives and expressing gratitude for having survived the ordeal. Some even organized reunions, gathering annually to celebrate their second chance at life. These meetings served as reminders of the fragility of existence and the power of unity in overcoming adversity. 1 year later, Marcus found himself boarding another flight, this time as the captain. As he walked past the cabin crew, he exchanged smiles with Carla, who stood nearby preparing for takeoff. Their silent acknowledgement spoke volumes. Two people, once divided by misunderstanding, now united by a shared commitment to creating a better world. As the plane soared above the clouds, Marcus reflected on everything that had happened. He thought about the insults he'd endured, the fear he faced, and the triumph he'd achieved, not just for himself, but for everyone aboard that flight. He realized that the real victory hadn't been landing the damaged plane. It had been proving that kindness, courage, and resilience could overcome even the deepest prejudices. Looking out the cockpit window, Marcus marveled at the beauty below, the endless expanse of blue sky meeting the horizon. Flying had always been his passion, but now it meant more than ever. It symbolized freedom, connection, and the boundless possibilities of human potential. Back in the cabin, Carla went about her duties with renewed purpose. She greeted passengers warmly, ensuring everyone felt welcome and cared for. Occasionally, she glanced toward the cockpit, remembering the man inside who had taught her so much. Though their roles were different, they shared a common goal: to make every journey safe, respectful, and memorable. By the time the plane touched down at its destination, Marcus felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This flight, unlike the last, had been smooth and uneventful, but no less meaningful. It represented progress, hope, and the promise of a brighter future. As passengers disembarked, many stopped to thank Carla and the rest of the crew. Some even asked if Marcus might step out to greet them. When he finally emerged from the cockpit, applause erupted once again. This time, however, it wasn't just for saving lives, it was for inspiring change. Marcus smiled humbly, shaking hands and posing for photos. "Thank you," he said repeatedly, though he knew the gratitude belonged to everyone present. They had all played a part in turning tragedy into triumph. That evening, as Marcus drove home, he thought about the road ahead. Challenges undoubtedly remained, but he believed in humanity's capacity to grow and evolve. Prejudice wouldn't disappear overnight, but with persistence and compassion, barriers could be broken down, one person, one conversation, one flight at a time. In the end, the story of flight staff insults black man, unaware he's a pilot, until he saves them wasn't just about a single event. It was about redemption, resilience, and the transformative power of empathy. It reminded us that even in our darkest moments, we have the ability to rise above, to learn, to heal, and to build bridges where walls once stood. And as Marcus looked up at the night sky, dotted with stars, he felt hopeful. Somewhere out there, another plane was taking off, carrying dreams, stories, and lives intertwined. And somewhere among those travelers, perhaps another Marcus was preparing to soar, ready to inspire, lead, and remind us all of what truly matters.